Good morning, everyone. The rabbi is doing rabbi things this morning. He's at Ohav Shalom teaching a class there every third week or so, but he'll be with us soon enough. Last week, we are in a very powerful section of Exodus, chapters 8 through 11. Do you all have that handout? We made it all the way to finish verse 13 about the putting the sign of the blood on your mantle. I want to, before we dig too deeply into that, I want to focus and point out a couple things which honestly I didn't know till Aaron and I started talking about the preparation. When Christians approach this story, it tends to be partly historical, partly this neat thing happened, and then interpret it, oh, this is the root experience. This is the event or series of events that made the Hebrews, the Israelites, into the Jews, and all that's true. But there are major aspects of it understood within Judaism that Christians don't really know. And I would say I'm pretty knowledgeable as far as the average Christian goes, but I didn't know a lot of these things. So we can say that the Exodus story is the foundational myth of the people who became the Jews. I mean, that's a story that tells us who we are. What's the foundational myth of America? How do we tell that story, or at least historically, how do we tell the story of America? What makes us who we are? How did we get here? Is it all peace and love? No, it's revolution. It's warfare. We were these hard-working people, and you could add nuances like, oh, it doesn't include women, it doesn't include people of color. True. These hard-working people in this colony who didn't want to pay taxes, and or they wanted to be free, and or they decided on this new form of government, threw off the shackles of tyranny, the king in a foreign land, boo, no kings, no, oh wait, it's Christ the King Sunday also. So there's a lot of conflicting messages in there. Throw off the shackles and create this new constitutional republic where every person has a say and so on and so forth. It's based on revolution that makes us who we are, and then they're the heroes and so on. Exodus story serves as a similar foundational story. Myth, I don't mean as a false tale. I mean it how it's typically used in religious studies like Joseph Campbell. It's the story that tells us who we are. So you have your family myth. Our family came here from this place and did these things, and there's usually hardship involved. If it's all easy, it's not really a good story. There's no drama to it. You've got to overcome obstacles, and it almost looks like you're going to die multiple times, and then you succeed. So that's what this story does. But from the Jewish perspective, it's not just, what's the Exodus primarily about? Let me ask it that way to you. What is the main thing that happens in the Exodus story? The whole book. Exodus, they leave slaves as slaves in Egypt to go to the promised land where they become free people and the covenant people. Yes. What I have missed in the Jewish perspective is that this is really casting off idolatry. That would be a very tribal, Middle Eastern way of thinking about it at the time. And that is, you are repudiating through each, and I'll get to a little bit more of this, each of the 9 plagues, the first ones, are repudiating particular Egyptian gods. And if Yahweh, Yahweh is a what type of God? Super loving and friendly, gives everybody a break. Jealous God. Oh, you're going to have no other gods but me. That's what jealous God means. So I'm the only one. I won't put up with that other stuff that you're doing. So they've got to unlearn all this. The Hebrew word for Egypt, I did not know this, is Mitzrayim. It means narrow place. And it was a narrow place somewhat geographically, if you consider just the river and the narrow, how people lived, but it was really meant metaphorically as well. We had narrow thinking with these pagan, i.e. not the right God. It's something else. And we needed to go to the promised land where it's broad and generous and all these things. It was not only slavery in a physical sense they needed to escape, or better yet, be delivered from. It was mental, emotional, cultural slavery. They had been shackled for so long, they forgot how to be free people. And so casting off these idolatrous, not just the gods, but everything about Egyptian culture had to be purged, gotten rid of, for them to be free. Egyptian religion had an emphasis on death. Case in point, what are the big monuments in Egypt that still stand? Pyramids. What are they for? They're burial, they're tombs for particularly rich, powerful people. That's where they put huge amounts of money and just all types of resources when in constructing these monuments to death, effectively. Yes, to help people in the afterlife and all that. Israel, and the God of Israel in particular, Yahweh, was about life. In fact, the creator God of everything that is. The idea is Yahweh creates life out of nothing, which is directly opposed to these Egyptian gods of death. Here's the next point. So what starts as the Hebrews, Israelites, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they become this people that gets populated throughout Egypt. And how long does the story say that they were there in Egypt? 400 years. And I gave a hint of an example like this last week, but let me develop it further. Now imagine if one of us, any of us, grew up in the fair, almost perfect city of Pittsburgh. And you, as you would expect, are a Steelers fan, and a Penguins fan, and a Pirates fan, as hard as that is to be sometimes. And yeah, you would even root for Pitt, and they're like, go Duquesne, and what are they, the Tartans, go Carnegie Mellon, go like every rah-rah home local team. You're black and gold, Yinzer through and through. But imagine if you got a job in Cleveland, Ohio. I felt like this visceral negative response to all that. Now, you would put up your posters, your pennants, your pictures of the old country of Pittsburgh, and you would be loyal for quite a while. But imagine that you're there for, 10 years. And then you have this crazy thought. Orange and brown, they kind of go together in a weird way, like the Cleveland Browns. And, they have a really good art museum, and their symphony orchestra is like at least as good, if not, dare I say, slightly better than Pittsburgh's. That's embarrassing. And they've got pretty good stuff, and it's very similar in all these ways, and I kind of like it here. In fact, it reminds me of home in this very strange way. And imagine if their team started doing well. And that's after 10 years. But what about if you had lived there for 50 years? Then what happens? Do you start talking like people from Cleveland talk and driving and giving directions like Clevelanders do? I don't know what that's like, but I'm guessing everybody's got their own particular way of doing stuff and the favorite local places you go. But imagine you're living there and you're completely immersed in that ethos, and then all your friends are there and your whole life is there and your kids grew up there. And at what point are you from Cleveland where you're not, well, I was born in Pittsburgh, but oh my God, I've become this other thing. That's expected. And imagine being there for 400 years. Does anybody here still speak the language, eat the foods, participate in the local customs that your families did 400 years ago? Now, a few of us may know where our families were 400 years ago. It's very, very likely that they're mixed from all over the place. Even if you're Native American, it's probably mixed from all over the place. So what are you? You're an American now. Well, okay, true. But what were you 400 years ago? Do you even remember? So think of that. That's how Jewish people will think of this story. So I never thought of it that way before. I always think, oh, they're Jews, and then they're here, and they're all enslaved. They're not one people. They're people from all over, all stuck in the same place. And what language are they speaking? Egyptian. And they're eating Egyptian foods. They are segregated, put in certain areas. The places, the land northeast of the main part of the river is called Goshen. That's where they stuck all the Hebrews. Segregated, but they had to speak Egyptian. That's what everybody spoke. They did every Egyptian thing. So what did they have for religion? You can't even keep your home football team in 50 years, let alone 400. They were Egyptian through and through. Maybe some of them still spoke Hebrew at home. That's probable. And a few kept remnants of what it was like. Like I have some old family photos, and I remember going to these places, but I don't think about it every day. It's not part of my conversation or worldview. It's just something in the past. And so that's what's happened. And by the way, where was God? I've raised this before. Where was God the last 400 years while we're all slaves? We're all being Egyptianized, enculturated, etc. Nowhere to be found. So when Moses and Aaron come back with a, hey, we should follow Yahweh, they're like, who? And what's he done for us? Not only lately, but like forever in 20 generations. A whole lot of nothing. So they become completely Egyptian in every way. And the story is partly telling they've got to get out all that Egyptian pagan or non-Jewish, non-correct culture, religion, language. Every trace of it has got to go. So all that being said, I'm going to look straight in the camera. Please pray for our former assistant priest, T.J. Freeman. T.J. left Pittsburgh, a great guy, and he's now the rector of St. Paul's in Cleveland Heights. And I'm going in January to celebrate his new ministry so that he might live and prosper in this foreign, deserted, pagan territory. We'll keep you in our prayers, TJ. So the next point about all that, particularly about the 10 plagues. So imagine if you're the Hebrew Israelite person, and you're hearing these stories from Moses and Aaron, and part of it is, yeah, whatever, I don't believe you, this is all just made up. It's a fool's errand. Why chase all this stuff? And then when Moses and Aaron try to, not confront, but speak, you don't confront Pharaoh, you speak to him with, groveling and so on. When they try to confront him, Pharaoh says, sure, I'll let you do it, and then changes his mind over and over. But remember what happens when he gets perturbed? Oh, if you have time to go out and worship, you've got time to not have to let us give you all the straw to make bricks. You got to go pick up the straw. You're going to work harder. So then what do the Hebrews think of Moses and Aaron? Terrible idea. But then they start seeing all these plagues. Because remember, this was a spectacle may not be the right word, public declaration of who Yahweh is. So if they're seeing the water in the Nile turn to blood, if you're one of those Hebrew people, what's the first thing you think is, wait, but my area is clean and drinkable, and the animals can drink it, and it's perfectly fine where we live. Well, that's something. And you remember all those weird ones of gnats and locusts and so on, but doesn't affect the Hebrews at all. It only affects the Egyptians. At what point do you start to think maybe there's something to this? Number 4 or 5? How many smack you in the forehead things do you have to, maybe I should stop doing this. Maybe I should not drive 85 down Shady Avenue. You get jarred into being awake. These 9, before we get to the 10th one, plagues, have you thought, at least I have, why does he have to kill all the animals? That's awful. Aren't most of the Egyptian people, you could fairly say, innocent? It's Pharaoh's the bad guy. Maybe the bureaucracy, that's the ones imprisoning them or enslaving them. But the average Egyptian, did they do it? Do they participate in the system that allows it? That's how we might think of it these days. Think of these plagues as less punishment of the Egyptians and more each one as a repudiation of a different Egyptian god. That's the point, I think, of the story. The final plague, so if you've got an Egyptian god of corn and locusts come in, you think you're going to have fertility? I'll eat up everything there is to eat up. The Egyptian god of the Nile, you think that's the source of your life? I will turn it into blood to putrefy it, to desecrate it. If it's holy, I will desecrate it. That's the right word, by the way. Blaspheme or desecrate. And I don't even want you to think about this too much. If people were to come in, and I've had, in another church where I served, I walked up one Sunday morning early, and there was a giant swastika painted on the wall. And I mean 8 feet. They took some time to do it. And what would be your reaction if you saw that on the side of Calvary? Well, it's a hate crime. Why did this happen? Is it because Tree of Life is here? Is it a crazy person? Will some physical violence happen? There are all these things that it raises because it's blaspheming who we are and what we do here, desecrating it. Think of all these actions as, in effect, desecrating all the stuff, the Egyptian gods and the power structure. It's poking holes where it will just fall apart. You must, Yahweh is saying through the plagues, abandon all of these Egyptian gods. There's a very interesting parallel in the book of Colossians that I preached about today, which is Deanna's sending sermon. The Colossians were a very new congregation of Christians in the town of Colossae in modern-day Turkey, and they had Greek and Roman gods. And if you spent your whole life growing up with those gods, and then you hear the story about Jesus, what are you likely to do? Say, you know what, I'm going to abandon everything I've known my entire life, which has served me more or less fairly well, and pick up this new one. That's not what they did. They said, you know what, we're going to keep all the stuff we had, and we're going to add this Jesus stuff right on top of it. That's kind of what you'd expect. Paul says, don't do that, not helpful. Very interesting, similar thing going on. Yahweh is a jealous God and says, nope, I'm not going to be one God among many, I'm going to be the only one. So every single other God that you may like or revere or worship, we're getting rid of them, one after the other. And then we just finished verse 13, get to this final plague, which remind me is what is the final 10th plague, the real clincher? Death of the firstborn, including the animals. So all the Egyptian babies, or whoever, I guess age-wise, doesn't matter, the death of the firstborn. So you'd have people dropping dead all over the land. What in the world is happening here? And how did the Hebrews avoid the death of the firstborn? Say a special prayer, cross their fingers, hide under the bed. They have to put blood from a sacrificed animal, either a sheep or a goat, put it on the lintel, the door frame of their house. And by the way, their houses at that time were most likely, the rough equivalent would be an adobe house, a mud house in the desert that stayed relatively cool, was relatively simple to make, and so on. So put the blood using hyssop. Hyssop, we don't know exactly what they meant by that, but it was a 2 to 3 foot reed where you could sprinkle lots of stuff. Some have said it might be modern day marjoram. I use boxwood when I sprinkle because it holds a lot of water on those little leaves. But sprinkle blood. The key point that I have never understood before, the blood of what? A sheep or a goat? Pure, unblemished. And if you don't have enough to afford one, get with other families and they'll do it. So here's the crazy thing. Guess what a sheep and goat represented? If you're repudiating all the Egyptian gods and all the culture, what is the worst thing you could imagine doing to blaspheme, desecrate, say, I don't care about this stuff anymore? Whose side, whose team are you on? So the Jews all had to do this. Both a sheep and a goat represented gods in Egypt. Rams were sacred to the creator god Khnum, and the god Amam depicted a ram's head. Amon-Ra, like Ra, the sun god, was a merging of kind of two gods, which was the king, the creator god. So you've got a sheep god, symbolic, and a goat god. So imagine, and to the Egyptians, those were sacred. They did not sacrifice those. I don't know if they ate them, but they did not sacrifice them. So think back to when Moses says, Pharaoh, we want to go out into the desert and sacrifice, without specifying. Why does Moses want to go out in the desert? Because if you want to go desecrate their deity, burning crosses, putting swastikas on stuff, you don't want to do it right in front of the guy who has the power to kill you. Just, self-preservation. You want to go far away where nobody sees you. But in this story, every Hebrew, in effect, the part of the process to become a Jew, loyal, faithful to Yahweh, is I will take the creator God, the rough equivalent of Yahweh, the most sacred thing, and desecrate it. And crazy, sacrifice that thing, and then so everybody can, it's like, oh my God, you're not doing it in your house, like with your lights out and the door shut. You're putting the blood of that sacrificed animal on the front of your door to let the whole world know. And yes, you're going to let the angel of destruction know, but that's who else is going to know? Every Egyptian is going to know you are not one of them. You desecrated. You want no part of who they are. This is an absolute act of revolution, a declaration that we're not going to be slaves anymore. We repudiate everything about your culture. We're going to be a new people. But what if that angel of death or God doesn't show up? What have you just done? So, been through 9 plagues, like, come on, God, do what you say you're going to do, because if he doesn't show up at plague 10, you are in serious trouble. Pharaoh is already about to get rid of you. He's like, but now you desecrated their most sacred things. They're coming after you. So that's the way they show the final separation. We are no longer Egyptians. We are this new people, Yahweh's followers. And remember, Yahweh is not tied to a place or a thing like a stream or a mountain. Yahweh is where the people are, and so moves. That's part of the idea of the ark, moving wherever the people go. So they're not Jews yet. They become Jews by the process of casting off idols. And so they tell their story in this Exodus event. What we're about to hear again is a commandment to tell the story perpetual. It's a perpetual ordinance, as they say. Tell it forever. And when do they tell that story now? There's a particular ritual feast, or meal, rather, that they use to tell it. What's that called? Passover Seder. The Seder is the meal that tells the story of Passover. And how many of you have been to one? If you haven't, it's a really good experience. I joked last time, I learned the only thing I can't eat in the world is tomato aspic and gefilte fish. And you don't have to eat everything. I'll just point that out. When you have to eat the parsley, just like, oh, thank you, that's very bitter, and then put it back on the plate. But you get to read and hear the story of Exodus and what happened. And did you notice they spilled wine during the Seder? Did you catch that? Why do they spill not a whole bunch, not like they tip the chalice. They spill a drop a whole bunch of times. Why do they do that? It's symbolic, along with a couple other things. No story has just one meaning in Judaism. It's layer upon layer. So one of the main reasons is Every drop spilled is rejecting, it represents a plague. It's rejecting one of those Egyptian pagan gods. So this is a memory of that. We also don't fully celebrate because the plagues hurt other people, the Egyptians, even though we're our enemies, so there can't be full joy. But each one is rejecting a god. So some Jews today spill a drop of wine all these times, and in addition to saying, oh, we're repudiating the god of this, you're supposed to ask, what are the gods in my life that have some control over me? Or what is it other than the God that takes my energy, my attention, my time, my money? And if you don't know what that is, look at your bank account and see where your money goes. It would be kind of fun to do. It could be a little uncomfortable to do that, especially if you have to name it out loud while you're spilling it, unless it's your very close family or friends. But it's a good practice because I don't think anybody in here is going to have any problem rejecting the god of the Nile. At least I don't think so. You could be pagans in disguise, and I'm completely unaware. But I reject security, or I reject the comfort of power or my position or whatever it may be. That's a different thing to think about. So that's also what's going on in this story. Any questions, thoughts about all the stuff I just said?
No.
Michael.
Yeah. What you're saying about Passover and the rejection of Egyptian gods is very interesting. But the commentaries I'm looking at have a lot to say about, for example, the festivals of Passover were an ancient nomadic spring festival that the Midianites celebrated. And the whole notion of Passover seems to have come out of Moses' adoption of Jethro's ways when he marries Deborah, Gershom, stranger in a strange land. That's where the notion of Passover comes from. And then it gets reinterpreted in the Judaic tradition as the Lord sparing them. But it really is, Passover comes out of the Midianite traditions, nomadic Bedouin people, and then gets reinterpreted as in the Judaic tradition as the Lord sparing the people of Egypt.
Yeah, absolutely fair. So for those who didn't hear, for the camera, Passover, one could make a very strong case, came out of Moses and his new wife and his father-in-law, known as Jethro or Reuel, who was a Midianite priest that had an idea of Passover that was very different. It was more of a seasonal festival. A lot of things, this happened probably in the spring. It also coincided with the planting season of Egypt, planting of wheat, when the locusts come in. So, and then, so that's you could say, one origin of Passover, and then total new interpretation gets layered and then basically covers over that meaning of Passover. And the new one is, well, the angel of death, God, passed over us and spared us and delivered us from slaves in Egypt. That's absolutely true. Particularly, and you can see elements of that in the story, and it doesn't, because the timing doesn't make sense. Keep this as a perpetual ordinance. Well, it hasn't happened yet. How can you keep? It's giving credibility to something that we do by pointing to something authoritative in the past. That happens all the time in different things. You're claiming authority to justify what you're doing, and is that a bad thing? That's a human thing. And that's partly what's happening. But also some things, when it's long, or it's been around for a long time, it takes on multiple meanings. It's a multivalent symbol, for example, what you could say Passover is. Pentecost, what do we celebrate it as in the Christian church? Let me ask, what cool color do we wear in church that day? Red, symbolizing the fire of the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost. And on that day, the Spirit descended on the people, and the people there, the crowds, heard the good news in their own language. Phrygians and Parthians and Medes and Elamites and all those names of people we never heard of before and can barely pronounce, and you just read it authoritatively, and everybody believes you know what you're talking about. And that's a day that we became the church and formed us as a Christian community, the presence of God in the world. But that just happened to be the time it happened, was the Feast of Pentecost. But so we make Pentecost this gift of the church, the formation of the church, the gift of the Holy Spirit. But Pentecost was an older Jewish agricultural festival that was being celebrated. That's why everybody was in town. And so which is it? Well, to the Jews, it's this agricultural feast, and to the Christians, it's this, and we kind of put them together. Is one right or the other wrong? Depends on who you ask. So it's normal for things, but you're absolutely right. Passover had a different meaning, and then it gets changed over time. Great question. Other questions, thoughts? Yes?
So the death of the firstborn, wasn't it the death of the firstborn male?
Death of the firstborn male. Interesting point. Thank you for that, Sandra. In the Bible, and Aaron has talked about this several times, there is a reversal of what you expect to happen quite often. And one recurring theme, we could almost call it a meme, is that the firstborn son doesn't get what he deserves or what is expected. Over and over and over in the story, the firstborn son is supposed to be the one who inherits, becomes a leader of the family, is the powerful one, etc., etc. But that's not what seems to happen all throughout the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. It's the second son, Jacob, remember, swindles his brother Ishmael and receives the inheritance. That's the whole basis of the Abraham, Isaac. The whole Jewish story is a brother swindling his other brother to get everything. Well, it doesn't seem right, but that's part of the, beauty. It's very human. It's the Old Testament, my experience has been, there are much more human characters than in the New Testament. It's just a very different thing going on. Moses and Aaron, who's the older brother there? Aaron. But Moses becomes Aaron's his spokesperson, but Moses is the one really in charge. That's not supposed to happen. In the story, Yahweh calls the people of Israel, the Hebrews, this is my firstborn. And the Egyptians, what are they? You wouldn't know this necessarily. The Egyptians are called the firstborn. They are the firstborn nation of the world. That is, in their case, the most powerful nation, empire that anybody knows in that part of the world. It's Egypt. And so, in effect, this is, you've enslaved my firstborn, I'm going to kill your firstborn. And my firstborn, Israel, will replace Egypt. It's this, weird's not the right word. If you don't know it's there, you wouldn't notice it, but it's a very clear, everything that was Egyptian is being removed. In the New Testament, we talk about it, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. The kingdom is upside down. What do you mean poor people go in before rich people to heaven? That's not right. I deserve to be in there. I've worked hard. I've earned everything I have. They clearly haven't because they're poor. That's how many people think. So it's switching that. Why should we pay attention to orphans and widows and children, the least well off in the society, which the stories of the New Testament take place? Because that's who God pays attention to. God loves everybody equally, but if the world doesn't love everybody equally, they should get a focus on them. It's that strange twisting. Yahweh doesn't behave like I think God ought to behave. Does he behave like you think he should? Allison, who's not here, well, where's the love, Jonathon? I don't see any yet. I see eating all the crops, ruining their water, killing the firstborn males to free a people, and then to be in covenant, close relationship, exclusive, monogamous. That's what Jews are with Yahweh. And here are the terms. Do the people get to give terms to God? That would be a big fat no. They say, thank you so much. And Yahweh says, here are the terms, what you call the covenant or the laws or the Torah, that you will be in covenant relationship with me. And those are things like circumcision, keep kosher, the 10 Commandments, don't steal, don't covet, don't kill anybody, murder it specifically says. And this is what the deal is. And that, Michael, too, is not one guy sat down and wrote all those laws at the same time. They are a mixture and confluence of all these sources that have come together, because some are highly specific. Like, why is don't murder anybody the same thing as don't mix cheese and meat? I can't have a cheeseburger or kill somebody, but is it worse to eat a cheeseburger than killing somebody? The answer is obviously that's a silly question. But all these things came together in this tradition. And some were from this group, and some that group, and some this time and that time, and so on. And they come together into these stories and then get layered upon layered on. Again, we do this all the time. And when you start to see them that way, to me, they become more interesting, and they become not a rule book to follow, but the story of a people engaging with God over a long period of time. And you could also, I think, fairly make the case, has God changed from the Old Testament to the New Testament to today? Think about it in your own life. Is God different? Old Testament, New Testament, or even parts of the Old Testament and today? Or has our understanding of God evolved? Because one, if you think the first visions of God, at least in the book of Genesis, are these cosmic creator stories. God creates the world out of nothing. And then right next to that, that's one whole tradition. Right next to that is another story about God creating the world, calling it order from chaos, and it was this watery chaos. And do you think they made up both of those stories completely whole cloth on their own? Probably not either one. Because particularly the second one, the watery chaos into order, was a very common creation myth from Babylon, the time where a lot of this stuff emerged. This is how people were imagining the world, the heavens came to be. And so rather than, let's just pick one, they picked two, which is a crazy idea. Did God speak the world in the beginning? God created the heavens and earth and said, let there be light. Story one. Story two, the whole world was a watery chaos. Which is the right one? Which is the scientific, factual one? Which is the real one? I think they put two so you can't limit it to that way of thinking. God isn't changing. Our perception of God over time is changing. So if you grew up, spent your entire life in a desert climate where it's mostly tribal and mostly migratory, I think Bedouins would be a good equivalent. If you live like that and you were not farmers, but you were traders and moving around and you shepherded things, sheep primarily, what type of God do you think you'd have? A God of agriculture? Heck no. If you're not a farmer, you don't need a God of agriculture. You need a God who does stuff and protects stuff. That's more migratory Bedouin type. If you are in the agricultural setting, you want a very different God. So Egypt happened to be an empire with a vast agricultural world, so you have two different worlds colliding there. All this stuff is absolutely fascinating to me, by the way. And we haven't even picked up where we left off last week. Any other thoughts about all that? Verse 14, Passover. This shall be a day of remembrance for you. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord. Throughout your generations you shall observe it as a perpetual ordinance. So, perpetual ordinance. Do this thing. We have a similar thing, by the way, in communion, Lord's Supper, Mass. Do this in remembrance of me, Jesus says. And do what in remembrance of him? Dance in church? Oh, no. Definitely not. He did not say that. Celebrate what we call the Eucharist, bread and wine, to tell a story that tells us who we are. The death and resurrection of Jesus. It retells our foundation myth, redemption myth, in that Eucharistic story every time we celebrate it, therefore every week. So the Jews would do it every year in this big event. We do it in a smaller way every week. 7 days, this goes on, you shall eat unleavened bread. This is, I think I need to skip. This is a lot of repetitive stuff. Eat unleavened bread, remove leaven from your houses. Whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the seventh shall be cut off. Why unleavened bread? Doesn't have time to rise. We need to be people on the move. So if you eat that old, nasty, Clevelandy bread of Egyptians, that shows you're one of them still. That's the point. Are you with this team? Are you with that team? Are you going to stay gross, awful Egyptians, or be one of the good guys, good girls, and go there with Yahweh? On the first day you shall hold a solemn assembly, and on the seventh day a solemn assembly. So worship at the beginning and the end. No work shall be done on those days. Only what everyone must eat. That alone may be prepared by you. You shall observe the festival of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your companies out of the land of Egypt. So this is the future celebration, or observance rather, of Passover. In the first month, from the evening of the 14th day till the evening of the 21st day, you shall eat the unleavened bread. This goes back to Michael's point. Do you think at that moment, right as you're escaping slavery, moving into freedom, you're going to write really detailed notes about on the first day you do this, on the seventh day you do that? No, this was written much later, and again, ascribing authority to it by placing it within the Passover context. And so jumping down to verse 21. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, go select your lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and touch the lintel and the two doorposts with blood in the basin. None of you shall go outside the door of your house until morning. So this fascinating idea, already mentioned, about repudiating Egyptian gods. Somehow in this story, blood, which desecrates, purifies at the same time. Does that make sense to you? It purifies, shows we're not Egyptian, we're one on God's team, Yahweh's team. That whole notion becomes primary within what becomes Judaism when they build the temple, when they eventually get to the Promised Land, and eventually Jerusalem and all the rest, and they create the temple. Blood sacrifice becomes the main way that they worship. When the temple's gone, they don't do that anymore. That's where we get rabbis and teaching the faith, and it's a totally different way of being Jewish. When the temple goes, they've got to come up with a new way. But they follow that blood-purifying sacrifice. Where does that get into Christianity? We didn't make it up whole cloth either. We borrowed this notion. So who is the perfect lamb without blemish, offered for our sins, who shows up walking down the road or riding a donkey into Jerusalem during the feast of the Passover, surrounded by thousands of lambs and goats that are there to be sacrificed? Jesus. Agnus Dei, Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So he becomes the symbolic offering once for all the sins. So it's a fulfillment, in a sense, of what the Jews eventually do forever. And you could say it's the similar idea emerging here in this moment. And I'm sure there are sacrifice of other types, but it becomes a blood sacrifice that purifies. We've been washed in the blood, as an old Baptist hymn, is a crazy idea. Would you be free from the burden of sin? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. I remember I heard that when I was 14. It's very catchy. A lot of Baptist hymns are catchy. But blood cleans, blood purifies, just like baptism purifies. So it goes on to describe And when your children ask, what do you mean by this observance? You shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, for he passed over the house of Israelites in Egypt and struck down the Egyptians, but spared our houses. And the people bowed down and worshiped. Did they bow down and worship before? Kind of. But you go through all those plagues, and then you realize you're about to be free, and then this is repudiation of the Egyptian gods. This is very clear. Oh, we get it now. We're not supposed to talk Egyptian anymore, not even with our friends. We're not supposed to keep all those Egyptian whatever in our houses. This is what it means. So they bow down and worship. The Israelites went and did just as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. Notice that it's a commandment, a mitzvah. It is, God said it, so then the people do it. They bow down, they worship. That's part of the deal of the covenant. Here are all the commandments or mitzvah that you must follow to be in relationship. And now they begin to understand. Now the whole rest of the Bible is not understanding or understanding and just doing the opposite. It's like Yahweh has a perpetual 2-year-old that kind of gets it, but then challenges you all the darn time, and they know why. That's the whole story of the Bible, pretty much. And then you add nuance onto that, of course. Don't quote me on that. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner, who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. Pharaoh arose in the night, after he's had his heart hardened, full of lead, 9 times. Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his officials and all the Egyptians, and there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. So there's no going back from this point. Yahweh has acted. The people, are they free yet? No. They're still slaves at the moment. And remember the even crazier promise? Before long, all the Egyptians are going to give you their stuff to go away. That's the most absurd part of this whole thing. Not only will you leave, they will drive you out and they will pay you to leave. What a dream for the Hebrews. Any last thoughts, questions on that? Steve.
Wasn't Pharaoh a firstborn?
Wasn't Pharaoh a firstborn? Great question. Apparently not, because he's not dead. Or they need a bad guy in the story.
Yeah, I just
Also.
wonder how he got to be Pharaoh if he wasn't the firstborn man.
Brilliant question. Don't know the answer to that. From the logic of the story, either he's not the firstborn or they need him around to make the narrative progress. You can't kill the bad guy too early. You need an antagonist. But excellent question. Russ?
I just vaguely remembering that later in the Torah, I don't know if it's later in Exodus and maybe in Leviticus, there's a second independent set of instructions for Passover with some noticeable differences from this one. Like it's no longer the first month of the year, it's a different time. It might be worthwhile pulling that up when you and the rabbi get together.
Sure. So say in other parts of the Bible, Torah, there is a second set, basically a parallel of Passover, probably somewhat akin to 2 creation stories. Or why do we have 4 Gospels? Why can't we just pick one? If we don't have John, if we only had John, then we'd have no parables at all. That would be weird, no birth story. But if we didn't have John, we'd miss all this beautiful, I am the bread of life, I am the root, and so on. What was there another last? Okay, thank you all. At the end of the 11 o'clock, we're going to send Deanna out to be the new church planter. Thank you all very much.